stood in the lift while it descended the floors, he loosened his tie and unbuttoned the top button on his shirt. "Phew! Glad that's all over," he thought to himself with relief, as he nonchalantly watched the control panel lights regularly decrease in number, whilst at the same time listening to an extremely good rendition of Brahms' Lullaby. After 20 floors, the lift finally came to a standstill. A friendly voice from above announced the ground floor, and willingly advised him to stand back while the doors opened. Will did as he was instructed, and then stepped out into the lobby. But as he did so, a weird sensation seeped through every vein in his body. This wasn't déjà vu, but something completely different. He couldn't rationalize why, but he knew something had changed. As he took a step forward, a strong breeze, seemingly from nowhere, began to swirl around him, leaving an icy touch on the back of his neck that shot down his spine. Reacting to the unexpected contact, he quickly spun around to face his adversary, but there was nothing or no one there. Actually, as he took a minute or two to survey the office, he noticed it was completely devoid of any activity at all. No phones were ringing or people talking. Nothing to suggest this was a busy office, but more like a ghost town. Only the gentle splashing of the rain from outside as it caressed the large floor-to-ceiling windows told Will he was not dreaming. He remembered it had been raining when he entered the building for his interview about an hour earlier, so he tried to pretend that perhaps his mind was only playing tricks on him. Connor was always joking about how he thought Will had a second sight. He, however, had always put it down to his own overactive imagination and dismissed the comments as nothing, although he did feel a sense of apprehension about this particular scenario. Most of his other experiences had been at night, in his dreams, not in broad daylight during a routine event. As he attempted to put the situation into perspective, he noticed that the rain began to fall more frantically, lashing violently upon the street outside. At the same time, the automatic lights within the area began to fade, one by one. Eventually, the lobby was clad in semi-darkness. Only natural light from darkened clouds outside penetrated into the open spaces. Will closed his eyes in disbelief and hoped that when he reopened them again, he would find everything back to normal. Alas, no, the hazing still consumed the area, and to add further to his growing nervous discomfort, he now thought he saw several vague shapes lurking within the shadows. On a second glance, he assumed they looked like normal businessmen in gray suits. Only somehow, he sensed their outer shells were merely a facade of their true reflections. Still skeptical of the images before him, Will stood his ground as he watched the figures advance towards him. Their shoes echoed hollowly upon the empty floor as they approached. Suddenly, unexpectedly, one of the men started to pick up a pace and began running towards him. At just a meter away, he jumped and launched his right leg out into a flying kick. At first, Will did not react, but then, at the very last second, he casually stepped aside, allowing his attacker to continue his move and pass him by a fraction before landing behind. It was a scene more like a slow-motion capture of a movie. Quickly, Will turned around to face his opponent just in time to see the man launch himself again. This time, he retaliated. As the left leg of his aggressor propelled itself toward him, Will grabbed the limb, and with all the strength he could muster, he threw the man to the ground. The body hit the floor and immediately shattered into thousands of tiny crystal pieces that skimmed across the surface of the room. For a moment, Will was stunned by the recent event, but regaining his composure, he began to survey the shards that were littering the floor. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered to himself as he looked around. "And how did I know that move?" There were no answers to his questions at that time. Only the other menacing, gray-suited figure advancing upon him at a steady pace. Will turned to run away, but found he had been backed into a corner. His recent victory disappeared, and panic began to well up from the pit of his stomach as the adrenaline pumped rapidly through his veins. He shut his eyes tightly as if to search for a solution, but too many jumbled thoughts raced through his mind. Realism of his desperate situation hit home, and he dropped his shoulders in surrender, allowing his arms to hang listlessly by his side. Connor would be disappointed in his efforts, he thought to himself, but there was little left he could do. Only as he visualized Connor's angry face did a sense of survival jump-start him into action, just as one of his unknown assailants grabbed at his arm. Instinctively, Will lashed out with his other hand. Fist clenched and prepared for action, it landed square on the man's jaw. Pain sneered through Will's hand and up his arm as the blow appeared to land on a solid mass instead of the expected flesh of his chin. Will wanted to cry out, but realized it was not wise to broadcast his pain. Instead, he bit his lip and prepared to strike another blow. The suit, however, had already preempted the next move and swerved, almost in slow motion, to avoid the oncoming hit. Will was stunned by the effortless movement of his attacker, but was not deterred. The bizarre incident was almost like some hack-and-slash game on the console, and as far as he was concerned, there hadn't been a single game that he and Connor had not mastered. With his frame of mind converted into a game plan, he reached with his left hand to his side to feel what apparatus he could convert into a weapon. Standing 2 feet high within arm's reach, the cylindrical metal shape of a designer orchid vase was just waiting to be used. Will was not certain that he could lift the weight with one hand, but considering his situation, it was a risk worth taking. Suddenly, he reached around the rim of the stand and felt the compost squeeze between his nails as he tightened his grip. With ease, belying its true weight, he lifted the object from its setting and crashed it against the suited man's head. This time his adversary was not as lucky, and taken by surprise as the pot stand cracked against his skull, splintering it into thousands of tiny pieces. The lifeless, now headless body crumpled slowly to the floor. With 2 of his opponents taken care of, Will was beginning to gain in confidence with his fighting abilities. Although he was still backed into a corner, his mind was clear enough to tell him to quickly explore more options, and as if by chance, one of the choices appeared. As he leaned back, one of his hands accidentally touched the wall behind him. To his amazement, he felt it stick across the surface of the wall as if pasted with glue. Shocked by such an odd sensation, he quickly retracted the hand and heard a quiet suction sound emit as the tension was released. With such an incredible discovery, his mind now searched through its memory. This could be his way out. From the corner of his eye, he could just see the proximity of the last 2 attackers as they approached him, and from that brief assessment he knew the only escape was up. Putting fear behind him, Will turned to face the wall and carefully and deliberately placed his hand slightly wider than his body, one higher than the other. One by one, he then moved them up towards the ceiling. The first few meters were the simulations of a child's first steps, as he precariously tested the theory. But once he realized that his feet would also stick to the wall, his self-belief grew, and soon he was running up the side of the interior towards the high ceiling. From several meters up, he considered himself safe, but the fact that his adversaries had already seen his latest action and were now looking around to see how they could reach him. His heart was pounding rapidly from exertion and fear, and he knew this was his time to escape. Swiftly he ran across the ceiling, and on approaching the window, made a lunge for safety. He didn't give a second thought about the thickness of the glass, or whether he was about to bounce off it, but was quite relieved when he penetrated through like a bullet. Outside in the street, he flipped himself over and landed safely on his feet. As if a bad omen from above, the heavens opened, and torrential rain began to fall from the sky once more. Its force was so strong, Will found it impossible to move, let alone to run away. His attackers, on the other hand, did not appear to be controlled by the same restraints, and wandered casually towards him. Fear once more began to emerge, as Will could not see any way out. Reality or dream, this time there appeared no escape. Together the men grabbed him by his arms and dragged him back into the building. Although still struggling with his captors, Will did manage to catch a glimpse of where the lift had once been, and instead of the mirrored doors, a gaping dark hole sneered menacingly back. Flames of fire flickered fervently around the entrance, and every couple of seconds tiny fireballs were spat out from the darkness within. Frantically he struggled within his captor's grasp, but their hold was too strong, and only encouraged their grip to tighten around his arms. Indescribable fear over the acceptance that his time was up bubbled within him, and by the force and determination of his aggressors, not to a place of gratification and enjoyment. With futile effort, he struggled again as the entrance of the darkness drew closer, and although visibility was poor, he sensed his life would be over if he was ever sucked inside.